so that we have a recording of this. So thank you all for coming tonight. I'm going to share my screen so you can all see what I'm doing. And I have a PowerPoint that I will share with you. So welcome to my screen. Can you all see that? Hopefully.
Yep.
And then I will, we'll go without everybody being muted, but if for some reason there's background noise, then I'll change that. I can stop and change that really quickly. And actually, Jessica, I realize if I'm sharing my screen, I can't see the chat. So if you could keep an eye on the chat and let me know what questions might pop up. I would invite you all, if you have questions while we go, to either type those in the chat and I can answer them as we go, or I can answer them at the end of this little presentation that I have. So thank you all for coming. Thank you to Hujiang Farmer Coalition for hosting this event here tonight. And this is part of a storytelling grant that they received from the Indiana Humanities. I believe that this is part of that program. So thank you to the Indiana Humanities for allowing us to share the power of story and the power of story to create change, for sure. So I don't know who's here with us tonight, everyone, but I'm going to talk about this storytelling in terms of both from the farmer and food producer perspective, which is usually how I deliver this presentation, but then also, simply telling stories as eaters and consumers who want to share stories about food and the power of food. I believe that Hujiang Farmer Coalition's storytelling grant program that they're working on this year is really about sort of rewriting the narrative around food in Indiana and getting some of those perspectives, whether that's just having a backyard garden, whether that's remembering what it was like when your grandmother used to make you, strawberry shortcake, whatever the story is. It doesn't have to be something that has an ask in it or that really has a purpose other than just telling that oral story and sharing the traditions of Indiana food and agriculture. So, we're hoping through this program for Hujiang Farmer Coalition to capture all of that and to get it into our history. So I'm Sherri Duggar. I'm the Executive Director of Socially Responsible Agricultural Project. That's a national organization that works to mobilize communities to oppose the construction and/or expansion of industrial agriculture in rural communities. I am former executive director of Women Food and Agriculture Network and Indiana Farmers Union, and I've been a consultant for several organizations as well as a former journalist. So I do have about 20 years of experience as a journalist and an editor. So I've been working with stories for a long time. And in fact, that's how I learned about food and agriculture, was through stories and editing a publication called Farm Indiana for years and learning about stories both through that job as well as the work I've done in advocacy and learning stories as I go, talking to farmers and food producers. So I want to talk a little bit about the value of storytelling. So stories do connect us, obviously, and they can help us to understand one another better. They do establish your expertise. So as a food producer or as a farmer, a story can help you set the stage for you being the expert on the topic that you're talking about. And actually, as an eater too, I always want to make sure that I'm connecting to the eater side of the story. As an eater, any story that you're going to tell is going to be your story. You are the expert. If you're a farmer for 2 days, you're an expert at your own story for those 2 days that you've been farming. So it is a really great way to establish your expertise and to make sure that people understand that you bring some value to this topic that you're going to be talking about. So stories do offer you control as well as a food producer, as a farmer, as somebody who's trying to make a difference in the world. You have control over your story. If you're not going to tell it, someone else might. So you need to make sure that you keep control of what your story is and to promote it and repeat it as often as possible. I will be repeating a lot of things tonight in this PowerPoint because repetition is really truly the key to the game in terms of storytelling. So I will be talking about that a little bit more later. So in terms of facts, social connection is often greater than truth or facts. Unfortunately, that's the way our society works. So we will believe people who have stories to tell us if we connect with them, if we feel close to them, and if we trust them. So they could be telling us something that's not real, and we will believe them if we feel that social connection with them. Repetition also, as I just mentioned, is greater than truth or facts, unfortunately. We can repeat something over and over and over again, and even if it's not true, eventually it will be seen as true if it's heard enough times. And I think there's a lot going on in our society right now that sort of points to this fact. So marketing people use this all the time. This is what drives advertising. They use repetition over and over and over again in their storytelling, in their commercials, in all of their marketing materials, because the more they repeat it, the more a person who sees it is going to take that and internalize that truth, essentially, about what they're trying to get them to believe. My husband, I have this quote on here from my husband who had a conversation with someone once, and he started talking about statistics in terms of what's going on in politics these days. And the guy stopped him immediately and said, "Oh, no, I don't do statistics." And I think that we need to really understand that people don't do statistics in a lot of ways these days. So facts don't, in fact, change minds. So we need to think about what does change a person's mind and what will make them connect to what you're telling them. And I'll get into that a little bit more later, but just understand that in this day and age, people don't believe what the facts actually are. They don't believe things if it doesn't match their own bias or their own beliefs and passions. So we need to figure out a way to connect with people who might be on the total opposite side of us. It is very much an us versus them society. So we need to figure out a way to get past that us versus them and to find a way to invite the other into our world and into our story and into our space. So that's what this is about tonight as well. So how do we get others to engage? What makes people act? It is not you telling them to do something. It is going to be based on their beliefs and on their passions, and also on the habits of their heart. So we connect to each other through our hearts and our humanity. And that is how we're going to create a story tonight that will get someone to engage with us. We'll think about things through our hearts, through our humanity, and how we can get them to bind to us a little bit more than they would otherwise. So what do people care about enough that they will act upon it? That's what you want to think about when you're telling your own story. What do people care about? What are you writing about that they're going to care about, that they're going to relate to, that will get them to engage in what you're inviting them to engage in? So the roadblocks to good storytelling, whenever I talk to people all the time, we get too far in the weeds. I've had a lot of workshops where in person where people will stand up and they'll start telling their story, and they literally start telling their story from like day one when they decided to start a farm or when they decided to go into a food business, and they want to take us on this journey from start to finish to where they got to that workshop that day. And truthfully, people's eyes will glaze over. People get bored. They don't want to hear all those details. They don't want you to get too far into the weeds if you're talking about the food system in such a way that is, permaculture or soil health or something like that, and they don't understand it, they're not going to stay with you in the story. So you need to make sure that as you take them on the journey with you, you're keeping them at a level that they're going to understand what you're talking about. They're going to understand why you're telling their story, and they're going to see where you're going with it. So sometimes we're not clear about the goal. Sometimes we use a lot of jargon that people don't understand. And when I say jargon, it's essentially every word I use every day in the work that I do in the advocacy world is jargon to someone who is just a consumer, who's just an eater, who doesn't understand the food system, and who hasn't gone on the journey that I've been on over the past 4 or 5 years. So we have to understand that we can't use the same words with every audience that we might say if we were talking to somebody who does this work with us. So as a consumer, as an eater, as a food producer, as a farmer, we need to understand that our language matters. And when we're talking to people, we need to talk to them on a level that they're going to see the picture of what we're trying to describe. So these are just some of the words that I just mentioned that I say every day, that I'm having conversations every day when I'm talking about food systems and advocacy. I don't know who's here with us tonight, but if you're not in this world of advocacy, these are probably not words that you would use very often. So these are the things that we need to figure out how to talk about those topics that you see in front of you, but talk about them in such a way that people will understand what we're saying. If I could say conservation, if I can say soil health, I can talk about GMOs. A lot of people, just the average casual consumer or eater isn't really going to know what that means. So we need to make sure that we're not losing people as we go in our storytelling. So this, let me see if I can get this away so we don't have to look. Okay. So this is actually from my journalism background, and I use this all the time just to sort of paint the picture. This is really truthfully like what is every story that you've ever watched in a film, heard in a love song, seen in a magazine or in a book. This is kind of the way that story is going to fall out. So especially in journalism, up here in the corner where it says who, what, where, when, why, and how. And sometimes wow. Essentially, those are the main nuts and bolts of the story. Usually whenever you're reading like a magazine story or a newspaper story, those questions, who, what, where, when, why, and how, and sometimes wow, if it's exciting, those are all going to get answered essentially within the first couple of paragraphs of that story. Oh, we've got somebody, and it's, hey, Kara, how are you?
Hey, Sherri, sorry.
Okay, if you want to mute yourself, that'd be cool. So those, the who, what, where, when, why, and how, and sometimes wow, you want to get that into your story fairly quickly when you start, if you're writing it, if you're telling somebody your story in the elevator and you're talking to them in 30 seconds, you want them to understand who you are, what you do, where you do it, when you do it, why you do it, and how you do it, and sometimes wow. So your story is going to start, if we look at this as, you know, on the left, starting with who's the hero. And I'm going to go into a little of these in a little more detail here in a minute, but you want to think about who's the hero from the left, go up to the conflict of the story. What's the problem you're trying to solve? Add some suspense if you need to, resolve the conflict, and then you want to reflect on why it matters. The folks who are going to be reading your stories or who are going to be listening to your story, they want to understand why this matters to them. So make sure that you remember the why, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail here in a minute. But these are the basic concepts behind movies, songs, books, magazine stories, whatever it is that you're going to be delivering a story, and social media too as well. Okay, why am I not moving forward? One sec. Oops. I went too far. So telling a good story. You could start off your story, if you're putting a post on social media, you could start it off with the words, true story, period. And that's a hook. That's something that's going to get somebody in and start reading because they want to know what your true story is. What is that you're talking about? Or you'll never believe this. Some of these hooks that you can use might be sort of cheesy, but really truthfully, people do pay attention if you start something quickly and just get them in there with, there's a hook. There's something I want you to know about. There's something going on here. You want to tell this story with energy. Obviously, if you're telling a story to somebody and if you're dry, if you're monotone, if you're not excited about the topic, then they're not going to be excited about the topic either. So you want to tell it with energy. You want to be authentic. You want them to trust you. We lose a listener or a reader immediately if they don't feel that they trust you. Have a basic structure. It needs to be simple. It doesn't have to be complicated, and have a good reason for telling your story. So all of these things are really important guidelines just to keep you in line. And think about this, you know, whenever you start a story, if you're doing it on social media, if you're going to write an actual story, if you're going to tell a story verbally to someone or to the Hujiang Farmer Coalition, if they're collecting stories for their grant program, think about how you can get somebody in, you can hook them with interest, you can tell it with energy, you can be trustworthy, transparent, and you can just have a basic structure, short little story, have a good reason, reflect on it at the end, and boom, you're done. So you want to make sure your details stick. If there's a hero in the story, which I'll talk a little bit more about here in a minute, you want to name that person. Names matter. They're really, you know, if you're telling a story as a farmer and you want to tell about why you got into farming or why it's important, think about, you know, and your grandmother influenced you because she had a garden when you were younger. Name that person, name your grandmother, tell the story through her eyes or tell the story through your eyes as you watched her when you were younger. You know, explain what the reason is for your story. Why does this person matter? And also, you know, this person doesn't necessarily have to be in the story themselves. It can be the person who's reading the story if in fact you can get them to relate to what you're writing about. So is the hero you? Is it the consumer who you're writing to? You know, for some of us who might be farmers, if they're selling food, local food to a consumer, the hero is the consumer in their story because they're buying local food. They're supporting local economies. They're supporting rural economies. They're They're buying food that's humanely raised, that's good for the environment, all of these things. So who is the hero? And it doesn't have to be a person. It can be the animals. It can be an environment piece. It doesn't matter who the hero is in the story. You just want to have one. Use your senses. The 5 senses are a great way to make your story memorable, because we do learn and remember through our senses. So this will make your story more memorable. So you want to remember your details, and I call these sticky details. These are like colors. These are like the details, the name, the age, all these things that can make somebody remember your story well. So remember those details. Make sure you have a hero, a conflict of some sort, which is that thing that needs to be solved, the why, and your ask if you have one. Now, if we're just collecting stories about food and agriculture for Hoosier Young Farmer Coalition, you don't necessarily have an ask, but you might, because you might have a reason why you want to tell the story about food, and you might want somebody else to sort of think about, you know, their history with food as well. So there could be an embedded ask or an embedded message in your story as well. I think Jessica sent this out to most everybody before we started, and I'm actually going to go, sorry, I'm going to break here and try to get my chat back up really quickly. I'm breaking from my thing. Well, I was going to do it. Shoot, forget it. Sorry, I was going to actually put the link in here, but I will try to just recap this story really quickly so that you all can see it. So this is a story I actually wrote. During a workshop, I met this little girl who you see pictured here. Her name is Tegan. And so the next day, I think I was about to take a shower, and I was thinking about Tegan, and I just sat down and wrote all this out. Now, I'm quite wordy. My bio on Facebook actually is the word wordy. I like to use a lot of words, and I like to really write things out. I don't expect anyone to write a story like this onto social media. But I did send this out. So if you got a chance to read this, that's great. If you want to see it later, that's great too. But essentially, I wanted to sort of pick apart some of the things that are in this story, because it illustrates a little bit of what I'm talking about. So this is a story about Tegan. I met her at this writing workshop, and I misjudged her because she's 7 years old. I thought she wasn't going to take part in the workshop. I thought she was just there to hang out with her mom. So I offered her some markers and some paper plates to draw on, and thought she would want to draw while we were doing the workshop. But in fact, she ended up taking part in the workshop. She did an amazing job. She stood up and told her story several times. She wrote several different versions of her story. And it was just a really incredible experience to meet Tegan and to learn more about her and to understand what was important to her. So I started this story about Tegan that I posted a couple of days later. The first line was, immediately, I could tell she was my kind of lady. She wants to be like you one day, her mom announced when she introduced us. I didn't take this as flattery, because it wasn't that Tegan idolized me. She didn't even know me. And then I went on to understand why she wanted to be like me. But then I mentioned that I had totally misjudged her. So that's the conflict of the story. I totally misjudged her. So then that's going to hopefully make people want to know why I misjudged this little girl. And so I went through, I named her, I talked about the gold stars on her dress. I talked about the issues that were important to her. I talked about her mom and how she raises Tegan to care about issues, how she raises Tegan to understand, you know, stewardship of the land and of animals and of people and the earth and that sort of stuff. She cares about women's issues. She cares about all kinds of different things. She's been to the State House, and she knew the name of the representative who represents her district. I also embedded a little message in this story about Tegan knowing all of these things about who her State House representative is, and how oftentimes people will talk about what's going on in politics and they have no idea who represents them. So I actually embedded some messages of my own opinion about how some adults are actually not as smart even as Tegan is about what's going on in the world, but we all have opinions about what's going on in the world anyway. So I came back around to the very beginning of the idea, which is I totally misjudged her at the end of the story. But in doing so, I get to tell the story of her now, of a girl who is smarter, braver, and stronger than I ever was when I was her age. Tegan wants to be like me someday. I want to be a little more like Tegan today. And that's how I ended the story. And so there's that twist. I recalled the beginning of the story, which was that Tegan wants to be like me, but I gave it a little twist because, in fact, I'd like to be a little bit more like Tegan. And so what this did was, I mean, it didn't go viral for sure, but it actually did get a lot of reactions and a lot of shares within the communities that where it actually mattered, which was in Tegan's mom's community, and her mom is a farmer. And it got a lot of shares and reactions in my community. Within the first few hours, it had 200 plus reactions, which was likes and loves, and it had lots of comments and it had lots of shares. And I think, Kara, one of these is yours. I can't remember which one, maybe the last one. Yeah, the last one. So there were lots of shares, and there were lots of people saying also, I want to be like Tegan one day. This is parenting done right. You know, Sherri and Tegan and Ann are the women I aspire to be. So what is happening here in these comments is that Tegan was the hero, but also the people who read this story wanted to be the hero, and they related to how Tegan was, and they pictured themselves as a hero like Tegan as well. So if they can connect through the habit and the heart, they're going to see themselves in this story. That's a story that will get impact. That's a story that people will remember. And then I ended up actually sending Tegan to the State House again later, and we got more pictures, and I wrote another one, and people remembered Tegan, and they celebrated the fact that she could go back to the State House and meet some representatives and have a really good day at the State House. So this is how we connect to people. We're telling a story that they can relate to, or they want to relate to it. They want to see themselves in this role, either as Anne, as a mother who's a farmer, who's teaching her daughter about all of these wonderful big ideas and things that she needs to understand about the world, or they can see their own little girls or boys being like Tegan as well. So there's lots of different ways that a person can connect to that story as a hero, or they can just really appreciate the fact that Tegan and Anne are both heroes themselves. So that's just why I wanted to include that story. So again, Tegan's story, who's the hero? She's obviously the hero. Anne is a hero because of the way she raises Tegan. The unspoken hero is all those people reading that story who might relate or who want to relate. There were embedded messages. I was embedding my own opinion about adults who don't know enough about what's going on in our political system to understand how things happen. What's the hook? The hook was, she wanted to be like me one day, but then I wanted to be like her now. So the conflict or the problem that needed to be fixed was that I had totally misjudged her. The points of connection, there were many all across the story. There was the point of connection. It could have been a parent understanding, teaching their children. It could have been a farmer who related to Anne, teaching their children on a farm specifically. It could have been somebody who related to knowing they don't know who their district representative is. So there's lots of points of connection. There was a story path. There's this idea that I started with where Tegan wants to be like me. We went on a little journey. I got a little opinionated at some point. I returned to the idea at the end, and then I threw in the twist that actually I wanted to be like her. The ask or the implied suggestion was simply, I want more people to be like Tegan. I want more people to raise little girls like Tegan. So there wasn't me asking for something specifically, just implying that this girl was great. Her mom is great. I wish more people were like these two. So it was a very implied suggestion there. So show us the story. As I said, I'm repeating a lot of stuff because I want you to remember this. I want you to remember how to do this in a story. Name her, the reason for your story. Show her if you can, or show whoever, whatever, if it's an animal, if it's the environment, show a plant, show the soil, whatever it is that you're talking about, show the food, show the zucchini that you grew up eating out of the garden, or the sugar snap peas. Engage our senses. And what are we talking about here? It's more than data. People like a little bit of data to understand what the situation looks like, but we're telling something that's from the heart. We're not talking about data. Even if we're trying to change minds, and even if we're talking about something that's very serious, the impact, which I will talk about later, is always going to be on us as readers, on the world we live in, and we want to talk about the bigger why, which I'll get to. So what are your 3 stories in the world of food and farming, which is usually where I deliver this workshop? These are some of the types of topics that sometimes people are talking about, and they're all over the place. And whenever I thought of this, I created this slide. I did this in about 5 minutes, and there's probably, 3 dozen more words that I could throw up on here. So these are the bigger sort of topics that are hanging out in the space of food and agriculture. Likely some of your stories will revolve around some of these topics, but I do want to say that it's all jargon. So we have to make sure that we drill down to the end result in each of those stories that you pick from. I always tell people, pick 3 stories, figure out what your topics are that you want to talk about, find stories that relate to them, and then craft those stories and repeat them over and over and over again. But you really want to tackle those stories from the angle of why you're talking about them. It's not food access necessarily. It's not, what are some of the other words? Land access. It's not food sovereignty necessarily. It's, why does food sovereignty matter? Who is the person that food sovereignty impacts? What's that person's name? Why is it important to them? Is it you? If it is, tell the story about food sovereignty from your point of view. So make sure that you can tell these stories. If you pick 3 stories that are the most important aspects of what you care about in regards to food and agriculture, but make sure that you name the person, you create a hero, you create a problem that has to be solved, and you reflect on why it's solved after it's solved. But it's all about why. So less can be more. Don't tell everything on the first date. You don't have to tell them everything right away. You can leave some for later. The point of telling, like a 30-second story or a story to somebody in the elevator when you meet somebody and you're like, you want to tell them a little bit about what you do. You don't have to tell them everything. Essentially, you want them to come back and ask you more. You want them to keep asking you questions. So don't tell them everything. If you get 3 stories together, you whip them into shape, make sure there's a little bit left over that they're going to want to know more about you. The details can help somebody. I always sort of refer to a connect the dots. I don't know if you all played with connect the dots when you were younger, but what you essentially want to do is you want to create a picture for them with dots, which are your details, but allow them to be able to come to their own conclusions about your story to some degree. Allow them to put those dots together. So whenever in the story about Tegan, if I'm talking about how people don't often know who their representatives are, I want them to be able to connect that dot. I'm not going to say like, you're a jerk because you don't know who your representative is. I didn't know who my representative was for a long time too. What I'm going to say is it's really amazing that this little 7-year-old girl knows who her representative is. So I will sort of throw some things out there, but I want them to be able to come to that conclusion on their own. Empower your audience. Oftentimes, whenever I do these workshops, I talk to people, I'll ask questions. I'll ask questions to say, how many in the audience have somebody that they know who hates their job because they feel like they don't matter? And inevitably, tons of people in the audience raise their hand. I'll ask them whether they know people who won't be voting in the next election because they feel like their vote doesn't matter. And inevitably, people will raise their hand because they know somebody or they are themselves that person who doesn't vote because they feel like their vote doesn't matter. And so I oftentimes will talk about the fact that we do matter. Our history shows us that people create the change that has brought us to where we are today. And without our votes and without our action and our engagement and our movement, and especially in light of everything that's happening right now in our world, these riots that are happening, these protests that are happening, all of this stems from a problem that needs to be fixed, and we have to create change. And the only way we can create change is to speak up and to speak out. So I want people to understand everywhere that I go, when I do these workshops, that their voice does matter, their action does matter, their story matters, and we have to create change. And the only way we can do that is through talking to each other and speaking up and making ourselves heard. So empower your audience through your stories to understand that they matter too. If you're telling a story as a farmer, you, like I said, your consumer, the eater who's going to purchase the food from you, they matter. They are the reason why you're doing what you do, because you're trying to feed your community. You're trying to make it as a farmer. This is an important aspect of our world and of our society, and they matter in this supply chain. So I just want to always empower through the stories that I tell, always, give people a sense of hope, give them really, the understanding that they do matter and that their voice matters as well. So that's all I'll say about that. Changing minds. If you do want to change minds, don't forget to ask. Oftentimes people will tell stories and they actually forget to make an ask. So you want to create a space for people to come and join you. That's, if you look at marketing and advertising of companies, that's what they're doing. They're creating hype around a product, and they're creating it in such a way that other people want to join it. So they have a product that, say they've got a famous person who wears those sneakers or whatever it is. It looks normal. It looks like fun, exciting. It looks like a party. And that's a community that some, you know, as a consumer, they want to join. And that happens with farmers markets. That happens with, you know, these CSAs. Their friends are joining CSAs. They think it's really great. They get all this really fresh food every week. That's what drives change. And consumers can help each other build your business. So offer them a space that they want to join, offer them a reason for joining, and explain to them why this is a good idea. If you're just telling a story about your food history or how you grew up on a farm or you really love to eat strawberry pie, it doesn't matter. Offer them a place to celebrate food as well. Be transparent, like I said, with the trust. If you are not trustworthy, your story stops there. Be specific, and don't forget an ask. If there is one, you can imply it. It doesn't matter. If you have an ask, don't forget to ask it, and you should ask it probably in the beginning and also at the end. Come back and repeat it, especially if you're writing like a letter to a legislator or you're sending a letter to the editor to a newspaper. You want to get your ask up front, and you want to repeat it at the end, and the reason why at the end as well. Oftentimes, if I will just mention, oftentimes if you're writing a letter to the editor, or you're putting something, sending off to the media, if they are short for space, which they are usually when they're printing, they might come up short on space, they will cut from the bottom. So you want to make sure all of your most important information in what you write, if you're telling a story in terms of a letter to the editor, is at the top of what you write. So don't forget the ask. Changing communities, no blame, no fear, no shame. I have a problem with this when I'm on social media talking about politics because I get angry about things. But we need to understand, we don't want to blame people. We don't want to create fear, and we don't want to create shame necessarily. We want to bring them into our community, and we want to go from the me in the story to the we. So you need to always figure out a way that you could be telling your story, but you want to figure out a way to move that into, how is it us? How is it a society thing? How is it a community thing? How do we create a community out of what I'm saying? So again, create a space that people want to join. Good communication is simple, clear messages, message repetition, as I mentioned, trusted messengers. This is where, for a farmer, this is where their consumers really come in handy. If they've got trusted messengers, if your consumers are going out telling their stories, they're telling their stories about being a part of your CSA to their friends, they are a trusted messenger for you. So who can you build into a trusted messenger? And in one of my other workshops that I did on storytelling, I was talking about doctors. We never talk to doctors about local food systems. Most doctors don't get food training. We need to start talking to our physicians about why we are building local food systems, because everybody listens to physicians. We trust our doctors. And so if we can get doctors to buy into what we're doing here and to understand why these food systems are important, why good, healthy, locally grown food is important, our doctors are going to be able to help us tell the story as well. So build your communication team. Who should be on your team if you're telling a story? Who should help tell the story for you? Is it your family, your friends, like I said, doctors, consumers? Who else is on your communication team when you're telling a story? Words to live by. A good story is clear, it's concise, it's consistent, and it sticks with you. So I hope that some of what I've told you tonight will help you to craft a good story and to tell it over and over and over and over again. So I think with that, I would just say, after tonight, if you could think about 3 important issues that you want to tell a story about. What are your 3 whys? Why are you wanting to tell these stories? Memorize them and then talk about them everywhere and repeat. So I think that's it, besides my contact information. I am Sherri Duggar, like I said, from Socially Responsible Agricultural Project. And I'm going to go back to not sharing my screen so we can see the chat and go from there. I don't know if there are any questions or not. Jessica, do you know if there are any? Maybe not. Nothing.
So far not in the chat, but now we're going to open it up. If anybody has any questions that they can ask them. I have one right off the bat.
Okay. And actually, others can mute and unmute themselves if they want to talk as well. I'm happy with talking too. Go ahead.
Do you have a recommendation about how long a story should be? I know different situations call for different lengths of time, but if I'm doing if I'm a farmer trying to tell somebody my story to get them interested in my product, do you have a suggestion of time, or is that?
Yeah, if you're talking about in person.
Yeah.
It's really hard. And I'm really terrible at telling stories in person whenever people ask me. I've been in workshops where you have to talk, you have like 20 seconds to get somebody's attention and keep it. And to get your information out. It's really, I mean, there's a standard, like you have a 30-second elevator speech. And so you really want to use 30 seconds to get out whatever you can get out. So that's why you need to practice at home. That's why you need to write down your story, whatever those issues are, get it down and memorize it so that you know you can hit all those points in that 20 seconds or in that 30 seconds and get it enough out there that they're going to want to know more from you. But it's not long, that's for sure. Any other questions?
Sherri, yeah, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So we got to know each other through my writing for Farm Indiana, which you'd found from the blog through National Young Farmers Coalition. And we've continued writing for our local paper ever since, because you got us in the habit and we really got to like it. So when you're talking about developing your 3 main important stories and telling them over and over again, we always struggle each month to try to figure out exactly what we want to talk about without being boring or too repetitive, creating like a following but reaching new audiences. When you're thinking about temporal repetition, do you have advice? Do you branch out from those 3 stories, or do you really just stick to that?
Yeah, no, I think you can branch out for sure. And your life is ever changing, right? So like, but you still want to think about those themes that are most important to promoting. I'm assuming you're still writing to promote local food systems and the movement and your farm, essentially. I mean, I don't know what your 3 topics would be, but like, they're not going to change in terms of those topics to make sure that you're always thinking in those, you know, in the background. Like I said, with these embedded messages, you can tell the same story through, you know, sort of embedded messages, but always tell it from a different point of view because something else will happen. So one of the things that I remember that you wrote, and it's been a while, my memory's terrible and I've read 1,000 stories, but you wrote about carrying water and how a grant helped you to get a water system. But that really was a great way to talk about the hard, you know, how hard it is for you to be a farmer because you don't have these built-in irrigation systems and you don't have the money to go get them, and why this grant was so important to you. And it tells this story, this bigger story about the struggles that you have as a small family farm through a bucket of water, essentially, that you're carrying. I forget how far that you had to carry it, you know? So, I mean, but those things happen all the time. And you were always really good at like coming up with a new story. You had no truck and you needed to borrow a truck, or you had this, and they're problems, right? These are problems with being a small farmer and not having a lot of extra cash laying around because you're trying to feed a community. You're doing something that's freaking really hard, you know, and then things happen. Did you have a truck breakdown or did you just have no truck? I forget.
Oh, we had a truck breakdown and then we borrowed a truck and it broke. So it was the story of getting to that 3rd truck that, yeah, right. It was quite the week.
So, but you still, you know, like these are struggles of a family farm. Okay. So, but in that you can also embed these other messages. Why is a family farm important? Are you feeding your community? You know, like why do you matter? And I think that that's what, you know, is important about the stories that you tell. The stories will change all the time. I mean, I know sometimes it's hard to like figure out like, what do I focus on this time? But really your same, you know, the heart of your story is always going to be the same. And that's those topics that I'm talking about that were on that slide of 3 different columns.
Okay.
Those are like the heart, and then the details change every month.
That makes sense. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have any questions or thoughts? I mean, it doesn't need to be a question. You can just tell me what you think about anything, or somebody can tell their story, because I'd like to know who's all on the call. Anyone? Somebody's laughing. Who's that? Okay. All right. Anybody else?
Hey, Sherri, this is Lace McCartney. Can you hear me?
I can. How are you? Are you there? I could hear her. Lace, are you there?
Oh, sorry. It's because can you hear me?
Yeah, I just heard that.
No. Okay. Oh, great. Sorry, I'm on an iPad and it was kind of confusing because I was watching it with my husband on the TV. But we are a small farm, and I love the concepts. I have maple syrup, and people love stories.
Yeah.
And I think that it just encouraged me to have more of an elevator speech. So I appreciate that encouragement, and just practicing is important.
Yeah,
So.
it really is. Yeah, I was actually, I'm more of a words on paper type of a person. I mean, I've been in journalism for a really long time, so I'm used to stories and storytelling and that sort of thing. And I was shocked at how terrible I was the first time I went to a workshop and had to stand up and try to tell my story in like 30 seconds. I was a mess, and I didn't realize like how much I needed to practice to tell a story in that manner. It's completely different from writing something out. It's completely different from the journalism that I'd done for so long. So we all need practice. We all need editing. I've always been a believer of that, myself included. So practice makes perfect. Anybody else?
That makes me ask a question about strategy. I'm very much the same. I like to sit down and write because I can erase. I can spend the time to think it through. I always get so frustrated. Liz grew up writing for the newspaper for sports. So she would get, a free pass into a basketball game, and she would always try to write her story as fast as possible so she could make the most dollars per hour. And we've carried that through to when we've been trading months for which article we're writing. And I don't do that. I'm always making less dollars per hour than she is because I really think it through. And I stay home on the farm a lot. And so I don't practice in person. So I'm curious, do you find personal practice to be useful for giving the elevator speech? Or is it giving it to people time and time again that you've noticed it being honed and developing itself to be a little more fluid?
Yeah, so what I suggest is writing it down. So that you can actually look at it on paper and practice and read it and understand it and memorize it. So that to me would be most helpful for me. Now, we're all different, obviously, so we can all have different approaches. But I mean, I think the first time I did public speaking, it was really, it was kind of like scary, but I do it so often now that I may ramble a bit, but like I'm super comfortable. I don't feel like the pressure that I used to feel whenever I first started doing this. I mean, obviously, the more we do things, the more we tell these stories over and over and over again, we're going to become more comfortable with them. So, but I think when you're first starting, or when you're trying to really think about your business, if it's a food business, if it's a farm business, and you're trying to, think about why you're doing what you're doing and why this story matters to your audience, who your audience is. And by the way, you do want to tailor it, obviously, to who your audience is. But I think the easiest thing in the world to do is to be able to write it down. And that's what I do when we're in person and we have these workshops, is literally I start the workshop with people standing up and telling their story. They'll work on it for like 5 minutes. And they'll stand up and they'll tell their story in 30 seconds, and they'll try, and I'll actually time them, which is terrible. And I'll time them and see how far they get in their story. And they're always over, because they always want to tell every detail of why they got started and all these, things that are from way in the past. And it's a winding road that, like, when people are listening, we don't know where it's going to stop. Right. But then by the end, once I go through the presentation and we work through some stuff again, usually if we have enough time, we'll go through it again and they'll get better. And it's amazing, you know, just in that time frame, how things will change on what they focus on, because they think about things differently. They realize that they don't need all those details. They don't need, you know, the timeline, the entire timeline of the career that they have, but they need what represents why they do what they do.
It makes sense. Yeah.
So that's a long winding way to get to an answer for you, but I think writing it down really is where, that's the way I would go. And then you repeat it, you repeat it, you repeat it, you repeat it.
Well, I think it's sound advice because you've mentioned as self-descriptions wordy and rambling, whether that's writing or speaking, and I resonate with that. So I think we can agree on that.
Yeah, I do it all the time, and I know I do it, and I try to fix it, but we have our habits. So
thanks.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments? I don't know who else is on the phone. What else? What does everybody do? Or
Hello.
Hi there.
Hi, it's Kiki. It was my laughter you heard earlier.
Okay.
I was just shocked because I forgot I even signed up for this webinar, and then I got an alarm and on my Android, so I couldn't find it, and then I finally stumbled into the Zoom chat, and it's my absolute first Zoom.
Oh, wow. Welcome.
So this has been really surrealistic, but I did want to thank you because having stumbled in, it's allowed me to actually refocus as far as what my next path will be. I'm an urban farmer in New Orleans.
Okay.
And I have been the leader of a community garden for 7 years. And quite frankly, I just farm because it gives me peace of mind.
Uh-huh.
And I work hospitality, and it drives me crazy. And I have land, and I'm at the point where I'm just like going, I got to do something because what I'm doing isn't working. But now I realize I just need to refocus, readjust, and fix my storyline.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. Thanks for coming. And I'm glad we're your first Zoom. Who else? Who's Jennifer?
Hi there.
Hi.
Yeah, so I'm actually in North Carolina, and I think I listened to a presentation one time, maybe with the Johns Hopkins.
Yes, absolutely. I did. Yeah.
So I
got for them.
Awesome. Yeah, so that was really helpful. And I am, my position is I work as food systems coordinator for a regional food council.
Yeah.
We are very new, so we're, I guess, just officially a year, but I've only been working in the position since January. And my role is a lot of different things, but in one of those roles is to help promote our food council and promote membership and build awareness. So thinking about writing down that elevator pitch and also kind of those three stories. Yeah, we've just started, our food council, we've just started a campaign called Meet a Member Monday. So I'm going around and telling stories of each of our food council members to kind of amplify their work and also to promote awareness. And so kind of framing those stories in this way is helpful to think about.
So you bring up a really good point, which is not only what I was talking about with the hero of each story, that's a really amazing tactic. And I've raised funds for school gardens this way, through social media, whenever I started, I realized I kept posting these requests to get people to donate to a school garden. Sounds kind of weird and manipulative, but I didn't realize it worked so well. But then when I started getting people to donate, they were my friends and I had weird random stories about them. So I started posting thank yous on social media to each of them personally when they would donate. And I would tell a little story about them, how I knew them or how we met or something funny that had happened to us or whatever. And within 24 hours, I had raised all the money I needed to raise and actually went over it. And it was literally because people started reading these stories that I was posting about their friends or the people that they knew. And I think they donated because they wanted to see what I was going to say about them. And that really taught me this lesson about like how much, I mean, for a farmer, for an urban farmer, for a rural farmer, like the more stories you can tell about your customers and why they matter, and tag them on social media, or your food council members and why they're important and why they matter in the food system. Like, people want to be congratulated. People want to be heroes. They want to be celebrated. And absolutely, like, I believe 1,000% we should be celebrating everyone who works in this food system. So like, the more ways that you can incorporate, you know, your own audience into your story, the better. So that's like a brilliant move to tell those stories about your members.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. It's awesome. Yeah, helpful to think about how to frame some of those stories too, and in theme. And
yeah, I mean, think about what problems they're solving in the food system, because there's a lot of problems for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Kara, you want to tell a story about yourself, or introduce yourself at least?
All right. Well, you'll probably hear my toddler in the background. She's running around like crazy. But so I'm Kara Babinick. I'm the director of sales and marketing for Gunthorpe Farms, and also the mom of Everly, who's 18 months old, and Miles, who is 3 weeks old. No, 4 weeks old now. He's a month tomorrow. So it is my, you know, as the director of sales and marketing, it is kind of my job to tell stories about the farm. And mostly I get a lot of my inspiration from my dad. He is the ultimate storyteller, and the more I talk about him, the more people really love that. They like hearing about my dad, and they like, yeah, my dad and baby animals. Those are the two things that really get people going on our social media. So
you have a built-in hero in your dad for sure.
Yes, I do. He makes it easy. So I'm really excited to be doing more of the marketing for the farm, because that's some of the less time restricted things. It can be more flexible now that I have 2 kids at home. So I'm looking forward to doing more of the marketing and less of the sales in the upcoming future. So our social media stuff will have a lot more content coming up soon.
That's excellent. Well, thanks for joining us tonight, and thanks for talking.
Yes. Sorry for interrupting earlier.
No worries. How about Lisa? I'm going to go to you next, Jessica.
Hi, I live in South Bend, Indiana.
Excellent.
I can actually get my camera going here. And I saw you at the FED event, Northwest Indiana Food Council, and I'm sorry I'm late.
That's okay.
One of those days that got away from me. It looks like you're recording this, so that
I am, so you can see it later. Yeah, for sure.
So here I am. So I've always loved food, and I've always seen farmers as heroes, and I was a food writer for a while in Vermont and a little bit in Indiana. So I'm always interested in helping get the word out about, you know, local food and
for sure
and growers and the importance of that. So hopefully I can catch the beginning of the recording and see what I missed. But I really appreciated your storytelling at the event. It was great.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
hoping to learn more about storytelling beyond just writing an article about somebody. So
yeah, it's an ongoing journey, even for me. You know, I've spent a lot of years in journalism, but I feel like all the time I learn about food and agriculture, like I said, from the stories that people tell me, or the stories that I live now, and through both advocacy and just, you know, living on a small farm, and even just waking up and feeding animals in the morning and things like that. But everything I learn is about food and agriculture is literally through stories. So how we tell them, you know, is I believe, and I'm going to school now, I'm back in a grad school program, and I'm going to hopefully focus, I'm planning on focusing on how stories can actually change health outcomes in food and agriculture, because they do. So I think it's a neat topic. I'm a little obsessed with it. So, so I appreciate being here. Jessica, how about you? Why don't you tell everybody who you are? I think you're the last person who hasn't talked.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, my name's Jessica. I'm here tonight with the Hujiang Farmer Coalition. As Sherri mentioned earlier, we're doing a project this year and next collecting stories from Hoosiers around the state of Indiana about their experience with food and farming to try and update that narrative. And so this is really helpful to me as a consumer to help me participate in the project so I can tell my own story about how I interact with food. So I'm really thankful for that and how I can help be part of the team that helps market for the farms that I love. So thank you for that.
Jessica, it helps you too in your grant writing, for
Yes,
sure. So
definitely.
Jessica's a grant writer as well. And absolutely, a lot of what I'm saying here tonight applies to grants as well. You have to get to the why your grant is different, why it matters in the food system, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're writing grants, they absolutely look at why are you talking? Why are you applying?
Yep.
So it should hopefully help you there too.
Definitely. Thank you again.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. So is there anything else? We're half an hour early, but unless anybody has anything else, I don't want to keep you all on the line.
Sherri, how can we find out more about your work with the that you were talking about with the stories and health outcomes? That's really fascinating to me as well.
I need to find out more about it myself. So I'm in a Master of Public Health program, and I just, because of the way I came into food and agriculture, which was literally, like I said, through editing stories and about, farms in Indiana, I just sort of gradually and very organically got into this role of talking about storytelling with farmers and food producers. Essentially, I went to a grass-fed conference out in California, and I sat through this workshop where this panel was supposed to discuss how to engage, the consumers on food issues. And literally nobody, the things that they said, they were like, oh, well, I use memes to engage people. Those were their kinds of answers. And I was like, why aren't we helping people tell stories? Like, narrative is how we can create change. So this is that's what inspired me to start getting into this conversation and to doing workshops and trying to teach as many people as I could to just, tell their stories better. And it does take practice, and it takes thought. It takes mindfulness of, why are we doing what we're doing? So now that I'm in school and I'm studying public health, and it's all through the lens of food and agriculture, and it's been kind of an amazing process, but I've been reading about environmental justice and all these, issues that surround our food and agriculture system. And it's amazing to see or to be studying how these communities, like one community in California, this was actually a community, a Mexican community, mostly immigrant community that couldn't, that didn't speak English. And they had these huge compost or waste incinerator plants that were right next to their communities and polluting their communities. And they were all sick, and all kinds of problems were going on. And literally through the telling of their stories, they were able to organize and get national exposure and support for their cause. And, through the media caught on, and all these things happened, and they fought and won against the country's largest, waste incinerator company trying to come in and expand on this incinerator that was already there, polluting their community. And that just got me starting to think about how we can actually change our health outcomes through the stories that we tell. And there are multiple stories. The more I started looking at that, there are multiple stories that are out there of communities protecting themselves. And essentially that's what we do through Socially Responsible Agricultural Project, is to help communities not only organize to protect themselves against industrial agriculture, but also to speak up, to tell their stories at hearings, to make sure that they're able to testify, that they're going to send letters to the editor, that they're going to tell their stories on social media, et cetera. So we're doing everything that we can to try to help them change their outcomes, which in the end is a health outcome. And no matter what we're talking about, whether it's an environmental justice issue or it's a food issue, it's a health outcome at the end of the day. We're talking about the environment, climate change, what we put into our bodies, our nutrition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It all comes down to health. So.
That's interesting, because I'm really interested in food and environmental issues. And yeah, they're very much tied together. And I took a master urban farming class through Purdue, and it was really interesting to see the different things that people do to create growing landscapes, like taking an old parking lot and just
Yeah.
putting all your material on it. And I've been thinking for a while now just about that, that link of how people know, I mean, through testing obviously, but how people can safely grow food in urban areas and how they can find ways to link, the environmental protection efforts through their farms and, creating green space and kind of thing. So it's very interesting here that you're
Yeah. I mean, and think about what we're going through right now with this pandemic. I mean, there are ties to, some of these viruses that are going around back to industrial agriculture, in China. And it's impacting, not that the coronavirus has been tied to that directly, it hasn't, but the potential is there. And the potential for those viruses to make their way here is always going to be with us. So this, the fact that China is really used to wearing masks all the time, and the folks in the United States really don't want to, but the fact is that it's probably going to be in our future from now on. We're going to have episodes like this over and over and over again. And so we have a storytelling opportunity to talk about industrial agriculture and literally what it's doing to our environment, what it's doing to our biodiversity, what it's doing to, our climate. All of these things are coming down the road, and they're going to become more and more and more frequent. And we've got to tell these stories. I think the more we have empty food shelves, the more we have these incidents where we have to wear masks because we're having these viruses that are spreading and we don't even know where they're coming from. And a lot of times they're coming from animals, and they're coming from animals because we're treating animals in such a way, in the way that we raised food. And there's just a lot of problems with our current food system, and it comes back down to impacting our health over and over again. And as this occurs more and more and more, people are going to start listening more and more and more.
The concept of food security, I mean, we're seeing it. That
yeah,
I lived in Vermont for quite a while and just really appreciated the local food scene there and how impressive it was. And just all of these different foods that we, like you said, we're importing from other countries. I'd rather trust the farmer down the road because they would have a bigger stake in having healthy, safe food for me than somebody I don't know out west or another country or whatever. So,
right.
I also wanted to ask you something about, with the short attention spans that people have now through social media. How does this storytelling? Do you think it's kind of making a comeback because people have lost that
connection?
Face-to-face? Yeah, the connection. They tell quick stories on social media, and they're a bit fast for me, but I really like that.
Yeah, I mean, I like words. I like playing with words. And like Nate was saying earlier, I like sitting and, I mean, it's like an art form to me to sit there and, roll around words on a piece of paper and see what comes out. So our communication skills in society today are what they are because of social media. So we're basically screaming at each other all the time, right? Through social media and fighting with each other and using memes. I mean, how short of a story are we getting in memes? So I think, we have to think about what those attention spans are and what people are now used to in stories. But to me, I don't know, if people think what I write on social media is too long and they don't stay with it. I have no idea. I can obviously tell from one story to the next how many people click on like or something like that. But I think you have to tell the story that's authentic to you. And we can think about the audience in terms of how we frame it. Because like I said, jargon matters. Like we don't want to get too far into the details. We don't want to talk about, a growing bacteria in the soil to an average consumer who just wants to know why this matters to feeding their kids, like a healthy food. We don't want to get too far into soil health or into climate change to where they're so depressed they think we're all going to die tomorrow. We want to tell a story that's authentic and that they can relate to. And so that's what drives it. Like, to me, it's not really about attention span so much as like, are you going to get them to connect to your heart and to your humanity? And especially in this day and age with what's happening in our world, we can see that humanity is clearly lacking. And so the more you can go back touch upon humanity in your stories and like how we connect to each other because we're all human, people are going to react to that because that's a story of love. So I would just say let that guide you more than worrying about whether or not they're going to stay with you. Anything else?
I'm also looking at doing some grant writing. So
Jessica can help you with that.
okay.
I don't love grant writing.
But I
So
know that like funders like to see the stories of what their money helped, fund.
yeah,
also,
they
I
want
like
to know
the-
that their mission connects to what you're doing. And that again is like, is our heart the same as yours?
Mm.
That's really what it comes down to. I say I don't like grant writing. I've written lots of grants and it's fine, but it's a different beast altogether. But it really does come down to a lot of the same premises. Like I said, is your mission the same as theirs? All right, Jessica, you ready to?
Yeah, I just want to say on behalf of if you want to check out Hoosier Young Farmer Coalition, that's HoosierYFC.org. You'll be able to find links to our YouTube page where this and our other webinar series we've been hosting about navigating online sales amidst the pandemic will all be hosted. You can check all those out online. Sherri, thank you so much for your time this evening. We really appreciate it. I think we've all learned so much in this past hour about how to tell our stories and be our best advocates. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. If anyone wants to stay connected, you can also go to www.sraproject.org. And I'll write that in the chat real quick. And that is the website for Socially Responsible Agricultural Project. And you can send an info or an email to the info email there and find me there if you want to stay connected. So, or look me up on Facebook, Sherri Lynn Duggar. So.
And if you guys were inspired by tonight's talk and you want to tell your story, like Jessica mentioned, if you go to the website HoosierYFC.org, we've got information about how you can share your stories. So you can call in, you can write in, or you can ask a question that you've always wanted to ask for a farmer. Now's your chance to pose it. And it's all part of this grant that the Indiana Humanities are funding. And we're really trying to use this narrative to progress the change we're looking for. So thank you everybody for coming tonight.
Yeah, and do you want to promote your don't you have a webinar tomorrow as well?
We have one more webinar tomorrow in our series on the online tools and marketing strategies. And Jessica, we can still sign up for that. Is that correct?
Correct. There'll be a link tomorrow on our Facebook page to the Eventbrite site to line up, or you can go to the Hoosier YFC and there's a link to the Eventbrite as well. It'll be tomorrow night at 7 o'clock Eastern with Faith Farms from Gary, Indiana.
Excellent. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here, and thank you all for what you do in the food system.
Thanks, Sherri.
Thank you.
Thank you.